Flash report. The House of Windsor has suffered an unprecedented internal coup. Behind locked mahogany doors, an absolute seizure of authority has taken place, redrawing the ancient royal hierarchy forever. Sources inside the sovereign household confirm an irreversible mandate executed in total secrecy, excommunicating members of the royal bloodline from the constitutional realm. The illusion of unity has collapsed, replaced by a ruthless exercise of crown power executed with cold, surgical precision. In the stifling silence of the Buckingham Palace council chamber, the final signature took less than 3 seconds. Yet its cataclysmic consequences will reverberate across an entire generation. Prince William, his jaw set in a rigid mask of absolute determination, lowered his fountain pen onto a dark, uncompromising decree. With one controlled, unrelenting stroke, he stripped Meghan of the Duchess of Sussex title and permanently excluded both her and Prince Harry from every official royal event. There was no grand ceremony. There was no public warning. There was only the heavy drop of a hand, followed by a silence so profound that veteran advisors surrounding the table seemed afraid to breathe. The air grew thick with the suffocating realization that a line had been crossed from which no return was possible. William kept his knuckles pressed against the polished wood beside the parchment as the room remained frozen in time. This was no impulsive act. The decree was a lethal instrument of sovereign authority, drafted after weeks of covert legal maneuvering to test whether the crown could surgically excise blood ties to protect its survival. It removed Meghan's title with absolute finality and erected a fortress wall against the Sussexes, barring them forever from coronations, state banquets, jubilees, memorial services, and the iconic balcony where the family once presented a united face. For several agonizing seconds, the future king stared down at his brother's name. Beneath his calm exterior, a storm of memories raged, reminders of a younger brother who had stood beside him through unimaginable childhood grief, walking behind their mother's coffin. Yet memory offered no sanctuary from the brutal necessity of duty. Across the ancient table, King Charles watched his eldest son with a father's shattered heartbreak and a monarch's agonizing restraint. The sovereign's hands trembled slightly as an aide quietly stepped forward, placing a black, sealed annex beside the primary decree. This confidential attachment contained terms and evidence so deeply sensitive that its presence signaled the loss of Meghan's title was merely the visible crest of a far darker punishment. Charles lowered his eyes, haunted by the realization that this document severed the final living thread binding his younger son to the institution he was born to serve. The king reached out a trembling hand toward the parchment, as if to delay the inevitable or plead for mercy. But his fingers stopped mid-air. The crushing authority of his heir's resolve locked him in place. Slowly, Charles withdrew his hand, looked into William's unwavering eyes, and whispered 4 fatal words. "Then it is done." William offered no response, his expression etched in cold marble as a senior courtier crossed the room to the official calendar and silently removed 2 name cards bearing the Sussex title from upcoming state events. The dry, sharp scrape of paper pulling away from wood cut through the heavy silence louder than any argument. Long before locked palace gates and legal decrees tore them apart, William and Harry were 2 young boys bound by a sacred, tragedy-forged bond. But where William learned to survive by mastering his emotions, burying private grief beneath the unyielding steel of royal continuity, Harry chose open defiance, guided by Meghan's unyielding belief that the monarchy was a tyrannical relic. To William, every calculated interview and public disclosure from Montecito was a treacherous dagger plunged into the crown's heart. To Meghan, the lost title confirmed her darkest suspicion, that the establishment had chosen institutional survival over genuine reconciliation. Now, as the palace prepared to deliver one final, private message to the exiled couple, the stage was set for a dark reckoning that neither brother would ever be able to undo. The deadly fracture that ultimately shattered the House of Windsor did not originate in the sprawling estates of California or within the sanitized lights of an American television studio. Its true origins trace back to the ancient stone of St. George's Chapel at Windsor, a sacred sanctuary turned battlefield during a clandestine memorial service designed as the monarchy's final act of desperation. King Charles, driven by a father's agonizing hope, had engineered the private gathering away from public cameras, believing that the sacred quiet of the chapel might mend what state diplomacy had failed to heal. Surrounded by the solemn shadows of Gothic arches, William, Catherine, Queen Camilla, and Princess Anne sat in uneasy silence, each acute observer aware that a single misstep would ignite a constitutional catastrophe. But beneath solemn prayers and carefully arranged seating lay a reservoir of toxic resentment waiting for a spark. Minutes before the memorial was set to begin, Meghan slipped into the vestry, a quiet, stone-walled room where clergy prepared for sacred rites, and requested that Catherine remain behind. Closed off from public hearing, the vestry became a pressure cooker of ambition and defiance. Stripping away the veneer of polite protocol, Meghan issued an ultimatum. She demanded guaranteed, permanent central roles at future state events, mandatory balcony appearances, and official recognition for her children, Archie and Lilibet. Catherine responded with measured, unyielding restraint, pointing out that ceremonial positions follow dedicated working service, not private coercion. The refusal ignited Meghan's fury. Her voice rising, she accused the Princess of Wales of enabling a cruel, archaic system that had humiliated her. Then came the phrase that sealed her fate. With venomous arrogance, Meghan declared that the monarchy would need the Sussex name long before the Sussexes ever needed the monarchy. At that precise second, the heavy vestry door swung open. William stood on the threshold, his eyes fixed on Meghan. He did not hear mere emotional venting. He heard an explicit declaration of war against the crown. Seconds later, a royal security aide noticed a faint, rhythmic blinking light emanating from a handbag left near the wall. Inside lay a compact, high-grade recording device, a covert tool designed to secretly capture intimate royal exchanges for future media exploitation. When Harry entered the room moments later, William confronted him with the device. Harry stared at the flashing light, paralyzed. His fatal hesitation when asked if he knew of its existence lasted only seconds, but it transformed William's suspicion into absolute certainty. Outside in the vaulted corridor, King Charles stood holding the printed order of service. Hearing the bitter raised voices echoing through the heavy oak door, the king slowly folded the paper in his trembling hands, unable to meet his younger son's eyes as Harry emerged in heavy silence. Reconciliation died in that vestry. Months later, inside a secluded sitting room at Windsor Castle, William summoned the Sussexes for one final, private reckoning. There were no cameras, no private secretaries, and no public relations handlers. Only 4 chairs, a low table, and years of accumulated malice. William placed the unsigned decree of stripping on the table between them like a loaded weapon. Catherine sat at his side, her expression watchful and stern. The terms William dictated were draconian: complete confidentiality, total prohibition of commercializing royal ties, an absolute ban on covert recordings, and an immediate cessation of public attacks on working family members. The atmosphere in the room turned suffocating. Harry leaned forward, his voice trembling with anger as he accused his brother of sacrificing Meghan to protect a ruthless, unfeeling institution that had failed her. William's response was cold and unyielding. The crown, he stated, could not function while every private family moment carried the threat of becoming monetized content for television networks. Meghan, eyes burning with defiance, looked at the document and warned William that taking her title would never erase what she had endured or suppress what she knew. It was Catherine who delivered the sharpest blow, her quiet voice cutting through the room. Pain did not grant a license for deliberate destruction. Before Meghan could counter, William delivered the lethal strike. From a leather folder, he produced a sealed security file containing forensic intelligence. The recording device discovered in the chapel vestry had been cross-referenced by palace security. Its serial signature was directly linked to a member of the Sussexes' private communications team. The revelation hit the room like a physical explosion. Harry turned toward his wife in total, unvarnished shock, whispering a single question. Had she known? Meghan's silence lasted only a moment, but it landed heavier than any confession. Disgusted and betrayed, Harry pushed his chair back so violently it slammed against the wooden wall. William did not flinch. He slid the decree across the table, looked his brother in the eye, and uttered the cold boundary that severed their bond forever. "I asked you here as my brother. I will sign it as the heir." The greatest, most heartbreaking resistance to William's iron mandate would not come from the exiled Duchess in Montecito. It came from King Charles himself, trapped between the ancient, uncompromising duty of a monarch and the bleeding heart of a father. Hours before the ink was set to touch parchment, Charles summoned his heir to his private study at Clarence House. On the heavy mahogany desk, beside the fatal decree, lay an unsigned letter of mercy. The king was not fighting for victory, he was begging for time. Though William had forged the legal blade, Charles still possessed the sovereign authority to delay its fall. His proposal was a desperate compromise. Meghan's title would not be permanently destroyed, but suspended for 5 years, leaving a narrow, fragile bridge for Harry to attend private family gatherings and state funerals. William read the letter of mercy without a single trace of emotion disturbing his features. Charles reminded him of the innocent bloodline, that Archie and Lilibet would grow up believing the crown had repudiated them before they were old enough to comprehend the war. But William's response was devastating in its cold, pragmatic logic. Preserving ceremonial access would guarantee that every future jubilee, memorial, and coronation would be held hostage to psychological warfare. Catherine and their children would exist under a permanent cloud of suspicion, never knowing if a whispered word or shared tears would be weaponized for commercial entertainment. Duty, William declared with chilling finality, could not survive in an environment of perpetual espionage. Then came the king's quiet, agonizing confession. Voice trembling with shame, Charles admitted that for months he had been exchanging secret, affectionate letters with Harry via secure diplomatic courier, desperately trying to build a private pathway home without William's knowledge. The confession hung in the air like poison. In response, William opened a black security folder and placed a single document beside the king's private letters. It was an intelligence transcript of an upcoming Sussex media proposal. In horrifying black ink, the king watched his own intimate, heart-wrenching words to his younger son reproduced almost word for word as commercial pitch material. The king froze. The heartbreaking reality of the betrayal shattered his remaining spirit. Charles removed his spectacles with trembling fingers and pressed his hands hard against his eyes. The silence in the room became unbearable. "I wanted to believe he was writing only to me," Charles whispered, his voice cracking under the weight of utter devastation. Slowly, he pushed the letter of mercy aside. He did not sign the decree, but he stopped resisting it, surrendering the full, brutal burden of the crown's survival into the hands of his heir. The balance of power within the House of Windsor had shifted forever. The father had yielded to the monarch, and the monarch was now William. Across the Atlantic, as pre-dawn gloom hung over Montecito, a secure telephone rang in the Sussex mansion. A palace representative read the formal decree in cold, unyielding language. Titles revoked, official standing eradicated, names removed from the royal record. When the line went dead, Meghan lowered the phone, looked into Harry's hollow eyes, and spoke 5 fatal words. "Your brother has erased us." Driven by immediate fury, Meghan ordered her communications team to draft an explosive public counteroffensive, branding the crown as a tyrannical establishment. But for the first time, Harry stood in her path, halting the statement before it could trigger a nuclear media war. A second envelope arrived via secure courier, a private letter from King Charles to his younger son. The terms were absolute. Private family contact remained possible, but Harry had to return to England immediately, and he had to come alone. No cameras, no publicists, no Meghan. That night, stripped of his royal retinue, Harry landed on British soil in total, shadowy secrecy. Instead of entering the grand gates of Buckingham Palace, he was driven through the dark to a secluded cottage near Windsor. Inside, away from lawyers and handlers, 2 brothers stood face to face for the first time in years. The air was heavy with unspoken grief. Harry spoke first, his voice choked with emotion, confessing that the decree felt like a public execution, stripping him not just of rank, but of his memories, his childhood, and his identity. William listened in grave silence before offering his own haunting admission. Signing the document felt like burying his own brother while they were both still alive. Harry pleaded to know if the decree could ever be reversed. William's answer was absolute. Brotherhood could no longer serve as immunity from consequences. When William raised the vestry bugging, Harry finally confessed the brutal truth. He had not known about the device, but his fatal hesitation had been a desperate attempt to protect his wife, even at the cost of his own credibility. William acknowledged the regret, but refused to alter the decree. To bridge the tragic chasm between them, Harry reached into his coat and placed an old photograph on the table, a picture of their late mother Diana, smiling with her two young boys. William stared at the image, his stern composure briefly fracturing, before he carefully turned it upright. No words of forgiveness were spoken, but a quiet, solemn truce was born. When the morning sun broke over London, Britain awoke to a cold, unforgiving reality carved in stone and printer's ink. Front pages across the globe captured the seismic collapse with brutal clarity, printing the haunting image of an empty state banquet chair beside Prince William's unyielding signature under bold, towering headlines. The final exile. Outside the grand, wrought-iron gates of Buckingham Palace, crowds gathered beneath heavy, overcast skies, locked in tense, quiet confrontation. Supporters of the crown hailed William as a ruthless, necessary defender of thousand-year-old traditions, placing floral tributes to honor a future monarch who refused to allow the throne to be compromised. Miles away, critics condemned the decree as an act of cold-hearted excommunication. Two opposing camps stood only yards apart, reflecting the irreconcilable fracture of an empire divided against itself. Across major news networks, emergency broadcasts interrupted regular programming as royal correspondents confirmed the irreversible reality. Meghan's title had been obliterated, and both Sussexes were permanently excised from the sovereign calendar. Yet, as media commentators anticipated a nuclear counterstrike from Montecito, an unexpected silence fell over California. Through a documented private briefing, it was revealed that Harry had officially agreed not to contest the decree legally or launch a retaliatory campaign. His decision to stand down sent shockwaves through global media networks. It was not an admission of guilt, but a desperate, final sacrifice to preserve the fragile, secret thread connecting him to his aging father. Deprived of her royal title and stripped of institutional standing, Meghan faced the total collapse of her standing within the royal order. In a brief, sharply drafted public statement released through her private foundation, she declared that true human dignity could never be erased by royal command or the strike of a fountain pen. She presented herself not as a banished duchess, but as an independent force standing far beyond the reach of palace walls. Yet behind the resolute language lay an inescapable truth. The keyhole through which she had observed and influenced the British monarchy was locked forever. The grand stage of state banquets, international diplomacy, and historic pageantry was gone, leaving her to navigate a quiet exile far from the center of power. Inside the quiet sanctuary of Windsor Castle, Catherine watched the continuous television coverage alone. As images of the empty banquet chair flashed repeatedly across the screen, the Princess of Wales reached out and switched off the display, leaving the room in heavy, contemplative silence. She took no joy in the crown's victory. She understood with heartbreaking clarity that the survival of the institution had demanded an excruciating personal toll. Every legal boundary enforced and every signature affixed had left permanent scars across the family's legacy. In protecting the constitutional future of her children, they had been forced to surgically cut away a brother, sealing the royal household in a fortress of stoic, unyielding isolation. As weeks turned into months, the administrative machinery of the crown systematically erased every trace of the Sussexes from official records. Patronages were reassigned, seating plans for future coronations and state dinners were permanently altered, and names vanished from sovereign calendars. King Charles, aging beneath the tremendous weight of his mantle, learned to exist in a painful double life. A sovereign who had surrendered the dream of family unity to protect the realm, and a father who maintained secret, fragile letters with his younger son through secure couriers. He no longer searched for grand reconciliations or public reunions. He simply accepted the fatalistic truth that duty and blood could no longer coexist beneath the shadow of the throne. For Prince William, there was no victory celebration, no moment of triumph in his supreme authority over the household. He walked the cavernous corridors of Buckingham Palace, carrying the heavy, solitary burden of a man who had chosen the crown over his own flesh and blood. He knew that somewhere in the quiet silence of history, his mother Diana would have wept for the two brothers who could no longer walk side by side. Yet history does not yield to human emotion. Dynasties survive not through sentimentality, but through the uncompromising preservation of power. The Sussex chapter inside the working monarchy was closed forever, not in anger, but in the cold, eternal silence of an institution that outlasts every human tragedy. Thank you for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe,